早晨，我哋而家夠人亦都時間。
Good morning, members. We've already formed a quorum and time's also right for us to start. So let's start. At this meeting, we'll have a public consultation on the future fuel mix for electricity generation. At this meeting, we can only accord time for the deputations to speak. So if any member would like to speak, they'll have to do so at our regular meeting on the 6th of May. So we can invite the deputations to come in.
如果有聽又俾你哋講，你每人1分鐘。
Well, if we are to listen to the deputations and allow you to speak as well, then I can only give you 1 minute each, because we have 30 deputations.
有呢樣嘢要政府作整體回應嘅係咪？係簡直俾佢哋問咧，做乜鬼嘢？因為有冇請埋政府入嚟？佢哋知唔知佢次序嘅？1、2、3、4咁埋呢邊攞，坐喺前面攞嘅。係各位早晨，好歡迎你。
Good morning. Welcome to this public consultation in LegCo today. The Secretariat reminds me to remind you that those who speak will not enjoy the protection under the LegCo Powers and Privileges Ordinance. The second reminder is that today we have 30 deputations today. We would like to give the administration a chance to respond. So I'll give you 3 minutes each. So please finish in 3 minutes. As for a discussion with the administration, that will be deferred to the 6th of May. So it doesn't mean that members are not going to have exchanges with you. I'd actually like to advance this meeting to 9 a.m., but there was a meeting in this room just now. So after you've spoken, I'll ask the administration to respond. Otherwise, you feel that members are not to speak after you've spoken and the administration will leave. So that's not very good. I'll not read out the name of each and every organization. So we'll start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, etc. from this side. First of all, Mr. Chan. Hello? Do you hear me?
Has been and in enjoying a high quality of reliability of electricity supply. Any major revamp or change of the existing framework should be carefully studied and should not jeopardize the current excellent level of supply services. In both of the two options, the consultation paper suggests that nuclear portion of the electricity generation would remain unchanged. The paper seems to have indicated that nuclear power have a lot of merits to reduce emissions. But the paper does not provide any reason why more import of nuclear power for Hong Kong is not considered in either of these two options. Option 1 suggests Hong Kong import power from across the border, implying that the additional 30% of power for Hong Kong would have to come from fossil fuel generation in the southern China. This will result in a higher pollution and more carbon dioxide emission in the region. When importing electricity, apart from those dedicated levels for particular committed energy sources, there is no distinction on the type of fuel used up for electricity generation because electrons do not carry labels. Thus, we don't know the physical fuel make of the energy so imported. In addition to the local level constraint for additional import, there are uncertainty about the economic the commercial arrangement, the trend of appreciation or depreciation of RMB. If the government had conducted past study, we would like to know the details. Politely speaking, both options have their own strengths and challenges. The real issue are perhaps the devil in the details of the option, allowing the public to understand better in order to make a choice, such as how reliability can ensure that emission reduction for the region can be achieved, while the cost of both options will be doubled. For option 2, the community would be willing to pay a high cost for a better environment, but the government should pay effort to lower the long-term electricity costs in Hong Kong. This may include conducting studies on the feasibility of unified planning and operation between two power utilities for maximizing the economic benefit through synergy. The fuel make and electricity supply is a complicated subject, and we appreciate the government's intention in this consultation is just limited to, or perhaps educate, a narrow subject of fuel mix. As a professional body, we would suggest more study are required and a holistic picture to be provided to help Hong Kong public to make a choice. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
好，多謝。下一位係余生。好。
Thank you, Mr. Chan. Next, Mr. Yun. I'm Dr. William Yu from World Green Organization. Between the two options put forward by the government, from environmental impact, price, as well as stability, there are pros and cons. To procure electricity from the mainland, we're most concerned about pollution transfer. The mainland will have to burn more coal in order to provide more electricity to Hong Kong, thus adding to carbon emission, impacting on public health and generate huge social costs. In future, there will be 20% of nuclear energy supply. Some will be from the mainland. So for option 2, we'll see that even the natural gas in future will come from the mainland. So if you look at option 1, regulation will have difficulty. At the peak of electricity consumption in the mainland, will there be sufficient power supplied to Hong Kong? That's our concern. As for option 2, the share of natural gas will rise to 60%, thus adding to the impact on the utility units in Hong Kong. So it's unavoidable that electricity tariffs will rise. Hong Kong scholars have conducted a study on willingness to pay for emission reduction. 18% additional cost is the answer. That is, the public will be willing to bear that additional cost. Imagine that if every year power tariffs are to rise 10%, members of the public may like to revisit both options. So in the whole consultation, the biggest restriction is that cost has been taken away. That is, if in both options electricity tariffs are to be doubled, what are the real differences? Members of the public won't be able to discuss the price discrepancy. And today we're only discussing technology and reliance on the mainland for power supply. Look at reality and environment. When high-priced power is supplied to us, we may regret today's option. For the establishment of the framework, like the paving of power cables, if we don't have such details, the options are not convincing enough. Well, if we support option 1, reliability must have sufficient justifications, and the data details must be given to us. Can Macau accept all? We have to study that. We're of the view that we need an option 3. We shouldn't have a polarized option 1 and option 2 only. Well, Mr. Cheung has not arrived. Mr. Ho first. Mr. Chairman, I'm Ho Man Kit from Momentum 107. When I was small, I was very slim, not as fat and white as now. And then when I went to soccer pitches, I was bullied by the other participants and visitors. When I was small, I tried to be friendly with others, and at that time, Class 3 phones were popular, So I watched those films together with my seniors. We gathered at a schoolmate's home to watch those films. So that gave me the impression that the strong will very often bully the weak. And when there are benefits, they may gather together. The option to purchase electricity from the mainland indicates that in the mainland at present, the strong is bullying the weak. They're bullying us, Hong Kong. Look at our experience from Eastern Pearl River. We're paying 170 volts more in terms of cost than Malaysia in procuring electricity from the mainland. Why so expensive? Even our reservoirs, when our reservoirs are overflowing, we have to buy such expensive electricity from them. In future, will we be forced to buy electricity from them? Now we know that on the mainland, there are always backup grids because of the unstable supply. In future, if even the mainland does not have enough electricity, will they still sell electricity to us? We may have to beg them before we can even switch on our lights. And even if we pay them actual money, we may be teased by the mainlanders. Maybe a professor will come out to say that even when you switch on the air conditioners, you're relying on us. So this is a major political issue. And there'll be another conflict between Hong Kong and the mainland. So why Hong Kong cannot sustain itself? So if the existing modus operandi has no problem, we procure electricity from southern Australia and other jurisdictions, even from the North Pole area. Well, Hong Kong can sustain itself, whether it's liquefied natural gas or nuclear energy from Mers Bay, Daya Bay, or whatever. We don't have to be controlled by another party. And then we can also maintain a reliable supply of electricity. And in Hong Kong, we must have a power plant before we can ensure a stable reply. So we must not make backup university a waste. That won't be environmentally friendly.
Mr. Chang, since you just came in, I'll give you a chance to speak first, 3 minutes each. I represent the Kwai Chung South Resident Association on the option A proposed by the Environmental Bureau, which is purchasing electricity from the mainland grid. It can serve as a deterrent to the constant rising prices by the two power companies, and it can give Hong Kong confidence. According to past records, the mainland often experiences electricity shortages, and they have received a lot of complaints. If we have to rely on mainland power, it would be hard to satisfy, to provide a stable supply in the region. If we see a shortage of power, it will have dire consequences on our society. We can tolerate brief power outages at home, but if you think about the impacts on traffic, on transportation infrastructure such as the MTR, it is something we cannot underestimate. We are not trying to discriminate against the mainland, but the fact is they are not having enough power for themselves, and this can hardly give Hong Kong enough confidence. On option 2, which is local generation, turning to natural gas more often. Even though the two power companies have constantly raised their prices, they have proved to be able to provide stable power. And if the environmental impacts are comparable, we think the administration should negotiate with the two power companies to come up with a solution in order to provide a long-term stable fuel mix for Hong Kong at affordable prices. And this will foster world-class, stable power supply. I hope the ENB can adopt our comments, and we also hope that the two power companies don't just look at making money, but they should think about affordability of the public. Mr. Wang from New People's Party, we understand there is a cost to conservation. There is no free lunch. In order to ensure stable electricity supply, the costs would inevitably rise. However, there are too many assumptions in the papers, and they actually mislead the public. The two options proposed, which is purchasing power from the mainland and local generation, in both options, there aren't adequate information or the possibility of alternatives. We think the government should introduce more types of energies, and we shouldn't have only two options. The estimations of electricity costs for 2023 haven't taken into consideration the rise of fuel costs in recent years. As a densely populated region, the stability of electricity supply is crucial to the residents. The administration outlined the benefits of the fuel mix, but not enough has been said of the risks. In case of large-scale natural disasters, would Hong Kong's power supply be safeguarded? The administration has not mentioned the risks of purchasing from the mainland grid. In 2009, the energy reduction target of 40 to 50% has been set, and the Hong Kong government was trying to set an example for neighboring countries. However, right now, the plan is to relay the impacts of pollution to the mainland. We are concerned with the outsourcing of power supply. There are different options, such as the introduction of nuclear power, power reduction, and these are something the government should think about in order to alleviate public concern. Mr. Choi from Democratic Party. There are a lot of gaps in the papers provided by the government. First, the objectives are not clearly set, and the direction is also unclear. In terms of the blueprints, we hope to achieve an improvement in air quality, and the public is also concerned with the tariff and the trend of the tariffs going into the future. We are also concerned with the stability and sustainability of the electricity, and also self-sufficiency, and these are not covered in the papers provided. When we discuss these two options, we are concerned with the purchase of electricity from the mainland. There are a lot of potential problems. Apart from stability, there is also the issue of transfer of pollution. What would be our future fuel mix be if we purchase power from the mainland? In the long run, will we really be able to save money by buying power from the mainland because the costs in the mainland are ever rising and their demands are also on the increase. And the second option, which is local generation, would it always be more expensive than buying from the mainland? This is only an assumption. In the future, if we see a fairer situation with the two power companies, and if we stop allowing them to make so much profits, then there might be a future for natural gas. We also have to think about the prices of natural gas in the future. It might actually go down in the future, and there is a lack of analysis on this front by the government. All along, we are hoping for more than two options for the public. The government has neglected two issues. First, renewable energy. Why don't we further develop sources of renewable energy? The government needs to do more and come up with more ideas for the public. And second, on the general direction in terms of energy reduction, if we look ahead to the next 10 years or so, why don't we have any new ideas to reduce energy consumption? And why are you forcing the public to choose from only two options? And these are lacking from the papers. Ms. Wong from the Hong Kong Professionals and Senior Executives Association. We agree with the gradual reduction of coal in the fuel mix and replace them with renewable energy. But we understand the limitations of renewable energy, and can it sustain, can it maintain a steady supply of power for Hong Kong? And Hong Kong must restructure its electricity supply chain, and nuclear facilities will continue to be under the spotlight all around the world, and the safety standards will be enhanced. And we hope the government should look at increasing the mix of nuclear energy in its portfolio and invites public discussion. We think the Hong Kong government should review its collaboration with the mainland, and the power grid should be enhanced, and look at the possibility of opening up the market. Electricity generation is a big investment, and the government should look into the efficiency of such facilities. And reasonable emission standards should be set, and the two power companies have to comply with such standards. We also have to consider the future of the electricity market in the market, and, for example, the separation of power plants and the grid. And if a collaboration is struck, Hong Kong cannot ensure a safe and steady supply of power. And we should not transfer the pollution to the mainland. And the government should maintain its bargaining power on tariffs. Both options are rather incomplete, and there is no strategic thinking behind those options. And we should urge the two power companies to communicate more closely in order to ensure the long-term supply of electricity in Hong Kong. And affordability and environmental concerns are also very important. Dr. Cho from the School of Energy and Environment, City University of Hong Kong. In order to come up with a satisfactory fuel mix for the future is a very challenging task, and it's also a complicated issue involving energy policies. First option, purchasing from the mainland grid to local generation. And both options serve to satisfy the 4 criteria set out by the government. We have to think about several things, international situation and local demand and sentiments. The stability of fuel generation, safety of fuel transportation, and all these would be affected by international relations and disputes. Should we retain self-sufficiency in terms of power generation? And Hong Kong's situation is comparable to the Macau. If we rely heavily on the mainland grid, the government should know that this will have negative impacts in terms of the labor market and other factors. The information provided is inadequate, and as such, I cannot make an informed choice on the 2 options proposed by the government. And in my paper, I put forth 15 questions. First, should we review the policy of not using coal anymore in the future? And second, should we have build a new facility for natural gas in order to ensure a more stable supply? Should we also think about the infrastructure together with the options proposed? And fourth, we should set up a real energy policy or strategy. So I hope you can take time to look at those 15 questions.
Next, Mr. Yip. Mr. Chairman, I represent Amoy Gardens. First of all, I support the SARG in the planning of the future demand of Hong Kong and to minimize the impact on the environment. Of course, the major focus of the policy is to allow members of the public to purchase safe and reliable energy in future for power generation. But it seems that the 2 options cannot satisfy those objectives. Option 1 is to purchase more electricity from the mainland to satisfy our needs. However, the purchase from Daya Bay will still be maintained at 20% and the remaining 30% from the new purchase from CSG. Power supply on the mainland has not been very satisfactory all along. As the other friend said today, sometimes factories have to have their own generators. We cannot reduce air pollution and reduce emission either. It's just that the pollution generated by power plants will be transferred from Hong Kong to the mainland. As for option 2 in the paper, that is to make more use of natural gas for local generation, the use of coal and RE will be contained within 20% of the total mix, and the natural gas component will make up 60% of the mix. To make use of natural gas for local generation, we're only allowing different fuel sources to play different roles. May I suggest that electricity purchased from the mainland should only satisfy 40% of our need, but the amount of nuclear power should be enhanced from 23% to 33%, and only 10% should be purchased from the power grid on the mainland. As for the remaining 40% should be natural gas, and the remaining 10%. This is to reduce our reliability on an outsider. And the fuel mix will not excessively add to the air pollution of Hong Kong. And then the natural gas used for power generation will not be increased from 22% to 60% in one go, because that will add to fuel costs, thus adding to electricity tariffs. And the future fuel mix should seriously consider what the two power companies had been doing to provide high-quality electricity and to provide us with the highest quality and most cost-effective electricity with regard to environmental protection. Civic Party. Mr. Chairman, I'm Anthony Bucks from Civic Party. The consultation document cannot make improvement on our fuel mix. Rather, more doubts have been generated. So we're very perplexed by the future direction for energy supply. The Civic Party is perplexed. So we have the following queries. First of all, for power demand, the increase of 1 to 2% per year is mentioned in the paper. By 2023, the number of units of electricity will jump from 443 billion to 500 billion from 2012 to 2023. The Civic Party would like the government to give us more details, and all information should be disclosed, including the study report compiled. Be it option 1 or option 2, energy will come from mainland China. The SARG should more actively save energy and make more use of renewable energy. Only energy supply is emphasized in the paper, not energy saving. So we don't have a comprehensive policy on energy. We should totally eliminate nuclear energy in the long run, but this is not mentioned, so we're disappointed. 60% of nuclear energy from CSG was mentioned, but we don't know the actual source of the fuel used, so we have doubts. We doubt that the so-called sustainable development option is actually going against green living. So the background of CSG should be explained, and the government's position on the use of nuclear energy should be explained. And only 2 options are provided in the paper. That's misleading. The SARD should not eliminate other options subjectively. So members of the public should not be confined to just 2 options. Next, Mr. Mock. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank the Secretary for the Environment for listening to our views. I represent the Hong Kong Federation of Trade Unions Social Affairs Committee. We are to enhance the proportion of natural gas. That will impact on the employees on both sides. For the use of natural gas, the manpower required for the power grid will definitely be lowered than that for coal-fired generating units. But of course, the use of natural gas is the major direction. So in future, the proportion adjustments can be made in phase, and a gradual approach should be adopted. That is to reduce the impact on the employment opportunities of the employees. That is, the change in proportion should not affect their jobs. Secondly, as for the enhancement of the use of natural gas, we agree to that direction, because at the moment, members of the public are very concerned about environment. That's a major concern. Yet, at the same time, the Bureau should further explain what merits will there be by using more natural gas to generate power. Is it that the waste gas emission will be hugely reduced when compared with coal-fired generating units? So members of the public should have more reference information so that they can deliberate on whether or not it is worthwhile to pay a higher electricity tariffs in exchange for a better environment. As for import of power, our attitude is a positive one. In the past, the two local power companies have monopolized the market. They don't have franchises, but since they are investing hugely on their operations, were confined to their supply, and the bargaining power of the public is very low. Well, to import electricity is one of the procedures to open our power grid, so that's conducive to public interest. In the short term, we may face some risks, but in the medium and long term, the scale of power supply on the mainland will be more cost-effective, and to rely more on natural gas will guarantee a more stable supply. We understand that CSG is using 20 to 30% of clean fuel, including hydropower, so we support that. Next, Dr. Look. Thank you. I'm representing Hong Kong Nuclear Society. In 2020, carbon intensity will be reduced by 50 to 60%. That's the target. Carbon is one of the major sources of pollution. So to introduce cleaner and low carbon energy is necessary and urgent. As for the consultation document, the government has put forth two options. The government does not mention the proportion of nuclear power, but the CSG option is actually to purchase some nuclear power. By 2020, carbon intensity is to be reduced by 40 to 60%. For Guangdong province, if it is to match this policy, in order to generate more power to supply to Hong Kong, low carbon fuel will have to be used. In Guangdong, wind and hydro power are not enough. The government does not expressly say that nuclear energy will be enhanced, but nuclear power is mentioned here. Our society supports more use of nuclear energy, but under option 1, to purchase from CSG is not ideal, because under that option, the reliability of supply is not guaranteed, and Hong Kong people cannot participate in regulation. As reported in the media, in the first half of 2012, CSG consumers have to bear 1.5 hours of power failure per year on the average. But in Hong Kong, it's just 1 to 2 seconds, so there's huge discrepancy. And under option 1, nothing is mentioned about ensuring the reliability of CSG to attain the standard of Hong Kong. It's not mentioned what happens if CSG has a large scale of power failure and how Hong Kong will act. As for purchasing nuclear energy, our society has proposed an enhancement to option 1. We call it option 1A. That is to take reference from the present mode of purchase from Daya Bay. That is, we only purchase electricity from dedicated factories, and through dedicated cables, electricity is to be supplied to Hong Kong. Well, we have been receiving reliability supply from Guangdong in the past is because dedicated factories and dedicated cables were used. Whenever something happens, Hong Kong can cut the link to ensure that we are not affected by the Guangdong failure. More importantly, we're able to participate in the regulation and monitoring of the system. Take for the Daya Bay plant, we have a notification system, and that's the result of monitoring on the part of Hong Kong people. Next, Mr. Lee Ping-Kuen. Thank you, Chairman. I represent Dashun Policy Research Center. Hong Kong is a logistic and financial center. In the past, we had a very stable supply, 99.99%. So a stable supply will allow us to develop our economy and sustain a quality living. Hong Kong is a crowded place with many high-rise buildings. We rely heavily on escalators and lifts. So that's why a stable supply of power is very important. At the moment, 53% of our power is coal-fired and 22% by natural gas. We know that in Hong Kong, for 60% of our greenhouse gas are generated by our power plants. If we are to improve the air quality of Hong Kong, the fuel used must be clean. My understanding is that in the past, the two power companies worked very hard to reduce pollutants generated by coal-fired generating units. But that's not as good as natural gas, which is generating much less pollutants. Natural gas is a very clean fuel. Solar energy, wind energy, hydropower, or even biopower, they're very clean, but they're very much affected by environment. In Hong Kong, no matter how hard we work, how much we enhance our technology, they can only generate 1 to 2% of our demand. Electricity is clean. 11% of global electricity is generated by nuclear plants. It's used by 11 jurisdictions. Nuclear facilities are very advanced with very tight regulation, monitoring, and manpower training is also very good. In the document, there are two options for our choice. One is to purchase power from CSG to supply to Hong Kong. Another option is to enhance the use of natural gas in Hong Kong. As I mentioned, stability is very important. I believe we should purchase less from the mainland because CSG takes care of 5 provinces. Whenever there's volatility, Hong Kong will be affected. So stability is very important. For the two options, for option 1, reliability is not very good. That will impact on our economy, safety, and quality of living. Natural gas is cleaner. So if we're to choose between the two options, option 2 is better. That is to enhance natural gas. Greenhouse gas can still be generated, but since nuclear power technology is so advanced, we should gradually make use of nuclear energy to replace our present fuel. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Peter Wong from the Lion Rock Institute. I have been at LegCo for more than half a year, and I was stopped by the security staff, and I think we are turning into another United States, like the TSA, where the checks are so stringent. It just shows how fragile the government is, and it's over concerned about things. And we are talking about conflicts between China and Hong Kong these days. Why is there such a big conflict between Hong Kong people and the mainland people? A lot of the times we pay, and yet we are being exploited. One example is Dongjiang water. We are paying an inflated price, and yet there are people in China who are saying that we have to rely on them or else we cannot survive. We are being taken advantage of. When we talk about mobile phone charges, Hong Kong is way cheaper than China. It's because we have an open market and China does not. And yet, some people in China are saying that they are helping Hong Kong or subsidizing Hong Kong. Right now, we have two options proposed by the government. Option 1 is purchased from CSG. if there is an electricity shortage or failure in Hong Kong, even if the reliability rate is 99.9%, there will be people in China who are saying that we are counting on them. This is something we must think about. How does the mainland obtain its electricity? What are the sources? We have no way to know if we are just buying power from the CSG. The government said they would monitor the situation. When they cannot even monitor MTR properly, how can they monitor CSG? I think we must have an option C. Ten years or so ago, the government was talking about building a natural gas facility in Lantau Island. And now, can we purchase more energy sources from more places? I'm Prentice Koo from Greenpeace. We are happy to see the government giving up its plan of using 50% nuclear energy, and this is very much welcome because all around the world, countries are gradually giving up on nuclear power, and the cost of nuclear power generation is also very high, and so we are happy to see this development. However, for the two options proposed, the public is not in does not know a lot of information. The government conducted a consultancy study, but the results haven't been disclosed, so we hope to see the results very soon. What is the role of natural gas in terms of power supply in 2020 or beyond? In the past 3 years, the supply of natural gas has decreased by 46% in the past 3 years. So what is the road ahead? The government must provide more information for both options. And going forward, are we going to continue to rely on mainland power, or would the Hong Kong government purchase power from the market? And for the electricity or natural gas market, the mainland will undergo reforms in terms of natural gas market and tariffs. The Hong Kong government must let us know the potential impacts of these reforms to the electricity supply in Hong Kong. And it might affect our choices of fuel, tariffs, and these haven't been covered by the government. In terms of environmental impacts, if we are relying on other countries for natural gas, we are just transferring the impacts of pollution to other countries, and we are just dodging our responsibilities, and this is not a satisfactory scenario. I hope the government can engage the Hong Kong people more in terms of energy infrastructure in the mainland, and Hong Kong should have a role in terms of global energy in the global energy scene, and we shouldn't be just consumers. Dr. Vincent Ho from the Hong Kong Association of Risk Management and Safety. The government proposed two options in terms of the future fuel mix, and I want to analyze these options in terms of risk management. Option 1, purchasing from CSG, but the specific fuel mix wasn't specified. According to the current CSG mix, 62% are from fossil fuels, and most of which are powered by coal, and 31% is hydropower and the remaining 6% nuclear power. If this mix remains unchanged, Hong Kong must purchase 15 billion kilowatt hours of power from CSG, and most of which would be coal power because it's cheaper. In terms of risk management and safety, coal and fossil fuels are the worst in terms of environmental impacts. And in 2000, a large amounts of pollutants were emitted from burning coal. And we are just, if we choose option 1, we are just transferring the impacts of pollution to the south of China, and it does nothing to control emissions. And in order to control the risk, we can ask the CSG to buy from cleaner sources. However, we cannot stop CSG from using cheaper coal to compensate for the differences. However, if we can purchase low emission or zero emission power from dedicated lines, then the supply of CSG will not be affected. And the second option is to use more natural gas for local generation. And from a risk management perspective, it's cleaner. Natural gas is cleaner, but we cannot predict the rising costs, and it's more difficult to meet future needs should any changes arise. We think if we adopt option 1, we can purchase dedicated energy from CSG, and option 2 seems to be temporary only. And when deciding the future fuel mix, the government should also assess the different factors of the fuel mix. Globalization Monitor, Mei Wong. The ENB started a public consultation in March, and we welcome the measure. However, according to the papers, the government has not looked at the roots of the problem in terms of power generation in Hong Kong. And we are especially disappointed as someone who opposes to nuclear energy. In both options, the government has maintained the use of nuclear power at 20%, which is unacceptable for us. We think there are many ways to raise energy efficiency. First, reduction of pollutants at source. In many countries, energy policies have been in place. When we look at places like Thailand, they have started reducing energy by 2011, and their target is to reduce 20% energy consumption by 25% by 2030. However, the ENB has not set up any targets or encouraged the public to reduce energy consumption. And no reduction objectives have been set, and this is rather disappointing. In terms of energy reduction initiatives, I will just raise a few points. The government buildings should adopt renewable energy, and legislation should be drawn up to introduce renewable sources like ventilation, natural lighting, and which we can install solar-powered panels. A lot of countries have been adopting such measures. In Germany, 1.8 million families are using solar power. So why can't we do it in Hong Kong? 70% of the solar panels around the world are manufactured in China. And these are something we should think about. And we think the grid and power plants should be separated. We should open up the power grid to local companies. And right now, the market is rather closed. And the government is only encouraging the two power companies to maximize their profits. The management of the power grid should be the responsibility of the government, and it shouldn't be outsourced to major conglomerates in order to encourage more companies to enter the market. Ms. Yu from Green Sense. The government hasn't finished the consultation, and yet it's ruling out the possibility of renewable energy. We are very disappointed. From the papers, less than 2 pages mentioned renewable energy. When the government is trying to sell the two options, it's stated that renewable energy is not very viable in Hong Kong, and they seem to have given up on the possibility. Is this really the case? Since a long time ago, the two power companies have started studies on offshore wind farms. We can is solar energy and wind power not viable at all? I hope the government can provide more information for the public to aid discussions. The options of nuclear power or purchasing from CSG only serve to transfer the impacts of pollution to the mainland.
The consultation document points out that CSG has a great deal of electricity generated by hydropower. But then Hong Kong has no right to doubt them. We cannot monitor them. So how can we ensure that the electricity we purchase is generated by clean fuel? Besides, should we do more on demand management? We see that in the past decade, power consumption in Hong Kong is ever rising. Very often, the growth was more than 20% per annum, but our population growth is about 0.5%. Why is there such a huge discrepancy? Is it that we have not been saving energy enough? For example, legislating on light pollution has not been done for so many years. And what about air conditioning in shopping malls? Do we need such a cold environment? If we are using so much electricity, should we assume that we need so much power and energy in future? In consulting the public on the future fuel mix, why don't you think about energy saving? In particular, for commercial electricity, a progressive refund system is adopted. Why don't you gather all members of the public and the business sector in saving energy? Next, Ms. Tan. Mr. Chairman, I'm a full-time mother of an 11-year-old child. As a full-time mother, I have to look at everything. I'm really very concerned about the impact of radiation on my child and the future generations. As for the fuel mix proposed, both options still use nuclear energy. We must think about DNA issues. We must not allow nuclear energy to affect our inherited DNA and capability. Now we have to ask how risky and dangerous nuclear power is. No matter how small the radiation level is, delayed opportunities of contracting cancer are still there. Just look at this DNA chain. Just a few volts will or can be carcinogenic. And a few mix may be composed of a few volts. Our tea leaves may also carry radioactive substances up to over 10,000 kilovolts. And what about plutonium? What about its energy level? 5.1 volts. Now, all these radioactive energy is actually a nuclear disaster which affects the growing cells of our children. If it is the sperms and eggs that are covered, then aborted pregnancy, allergy, arthritis, and all sorts of diseases may be inherited from one generation to another. Ever since the 1950s, when we had nuclear tests, in 1968 and 1969, tests conducted by scientists discovered that DNA changes were at the level of 5 to 6%, but in 1986, the former Chernobyl disaster in Soviet Union had seen numerous children died. You can see their graves. 80% of the babies born were not healthy. So nuclear power may be eliminating the human race. So should we compromise? Friends, we hope that in terms of fuel mix, our only choice is zero nuclear power. In our submission, we have some independent study reports, which we hope you'll read. Next, Ms. Kwok. I'm a director of a chemical factory. I would speak on rationality and reasonable prices. We are SMEs on the mainland. You know, on the mainland, all factories have backup generators. In Hong Kong, we don't have. There are testing devices that have to be kept in a very stable environment. Let me ask you this. If we purchase electricity from CSG, if major natural disasters are to happen on the mainland, how can we ensure that power supply to Hong Kong will not be affected? They affect us directly. We are industrialists who are concerned about reasonable prices. Labor costs as well as material costs are rising tremendously on the mainland, as many people know. I'd like to know, what about price regulation? In future, in terms of agreements or whatnot, can you regulate or monitor costs? Thank you. Next, Mr. Tan. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I have very little time and I'm very nervous. Still, I'd like to bring forth more concepts. For this public consultation carried out by the Environment Bureau, we're very disappointed. We'd like the administration to withdraw both options. Well, to say it directly, as many friends said, it's no choice at all. You can only choose radioactive manual 1 and radioactive manual 2. For option 1, for purchases from CSG, just now when some friends asked, Mr. Wong Kam Seng, the secretary, Mr. Wong did not respond positively or negatively to the use of nuclear power. He actually asked us to be more pragmatic. So that's the attitude of the government. That is, by way of outsourcing, the government is trying to hide information. This is very unreasonable. friends for and against nuclear power have said in future CSG is to sell us more power. In many cities on the mainland, there are a lot of nuclear plants planned. So don't tell us that by buying from CSG you won't enhance the use of nuclear power. You have to explain to the public. That's point number one. Well, even in option 2, the Daya Bay nuclear power station is to supply 20% of nuclear power to us. Still, we have monopoly on the part of the two power companies. For this fuel mix consultation, we want zero nuclear power. We should take this opportunity to reflect on the whole fuel mix and power generation. So the two options should be withdrawn. We should look at the schemes of control, the relationship between the government and the two power companies. It's heavily criticized. Why is it the more electricity you use, the lower your electricity bill is? It's actually a waste of electricity and energy. Well, I don't have much time. Let me repeat that energy autonomy is time-consuming. Hong Kong needs to develop small-scale power generation systems to have enhanced ventilation. We must explore the use of renewable energy. So, all in all, zero nuclear power and withdrawal of the two options. Next, Ms. Lau. Thank you, Chairman. This time, the government has proposed two options for fuel mix, and it's for the first time that a grid-to-grid import is suggested, that is to buy electricity from CSG. However, this consultation exercise will impact on the electricity market direction of Hong Kong in the next decade. We have to be very careful in studying the options. Both options are inadequate. For option 1, we're very concerned about the stability of supply from CSG. At the moment, our stability is 99.999%. If we purchase power from the mainland, if anything is to happen, can our backup units immediately supply power? Secondly, about costs. Grid-to-grid supply will involve huge investment on the mainland. In the long run, if we are to rely on the mainland for 30% of our electricity, our bargaining power may be weakened. And then for CSG, we cannot require it to use clean fuel in supplying power to Hong Kong. So Hong Kong's control of emission reduction will also be weakened. And as regards option 2, the use of natural gas will rise to 60%. The price of natural gas is very volatile, so we are concerned about prices. As for emission, further room for improvement may also be reduced. And no financial details are provided in the document. We don't know the new investment by the two power companies on the new grids. And specific targets for renewable energy have not been put forth. They are combined with coal-fired generating units, so we doubt the determination of the government on the use of RE. All in all, the consultation options lack actual data and planning details. If we are to choose one of the two, the public will be worried. If we choose one of the two options, in future, when we start to discuss the details, we may have lots of expectation. Next, also, Ms. Lau. Mr. Chairman, good morning, everybody. I'm concerned about nuclear energy. In the main, I'd like to speak on 2 points. First of all, information on nuclear power and other energy are very misleading. Secondly, the development of RE in Hong Kong is very backward. as a general member of the public, if we are to choose a few for power generation, we must have a comprehensive knowledge of information. But textbooks and other information are continuously misleading the public. The Education Bureau and textbooks said that nuclear energy is clean and of zero emission. However, nuclear energy will directly emit radiation into the atmosphere. And from mining to compression to permanent storage, the whole life shell is very long and huge costs are involved. And in one of the examination scripts, the cost of nuclear energy was described as only 50% of hydropower. And even in this document, the government claims that nuclear power is cheap and stable, while RE is expensive and not stable enough. Germany, Spain, and other European jurisdictions are actually spending the same level of costs on electricity, nuclear electricity, as other jurisdictions. And in Hong Kong, we don't have power generation resources. So if at this juncture we rule out RE, it is an indication of no commitment on the part of the government. In 2002, there's a study on the installation of equipment for RE. But at that time, the most conservative view is that we could only develop 1% of RE. And now we see no progress. So even in future, we can only see an improvement of 1%. In the German experience, we can see that in the year 2000, when they had the law on RE, many SMEs, cooperative societies, households have invested on RE. In just 12 years, their RE jumped from 5% to 25%. Why don't we model on or take reference from their experience? The two options here have not mentioned anything about RE. This has disregarded Hong Kong's crisis of being besieged by nuclear energy. We don't just have RE, but we must have a social network for the use of RE. We should allow members of the public to take the initiative to save energy, enhance ventilation. So we must make more use of RE and have zero nuclear energy.
Ms. Lee, Dai Hong Kong Society for the Study of Nuclear Radiation. I just want to respond to some of the delegations, like the Dashun Policy Research Center. I just want to point out that renewable energy costs more. This is something you have to think about. I'm sure everyone has their views on nuclear power, and we just want to provide more details for consideration. So what do we know about nuclear power and what do we not know? So we have to understand the limitations. So let me jump to the conclusion first. Even with the help of equipment, we cannot ascertain where the radiations are. The Hong Kong Observatory does have monitoring stations, but these are inadequate. In Hong Kong Island, we only have monitors in Shek O and Sai Wan Ho. So there is a concept you have to know, and that's nuclear hotspot. And it requires a lot of equipment, and Hong Kong would not have the resources to do so. And these gamma counters can only detect gamma radiations, and it cannot detect high energy radiations. And we are seeing an imparity of information. This is just unfair. If we have to ask the public to bear this risk. And second, we cannot ascertain the permissible those of radiations. As someone has already said, there is no safety standard for radiations. Since they carry very high energy, even small doses can have big impacts. And 10 years or so ago, American scientists have pointed out that Hong Kong's standards are too lax. Behind all these standards, there are a lot of assumptions. So please be aware of these facts. So if the government does their homework, then they will know all these. But I don't think this is. They would take the effort to do this. I've bought a few books, and this book talks about nuclear military technologies in America, and all these technologies can even change the climate. And so please don't just rave about new technologies, because they might have negative impacts. So these are all I have to say. Mr. Chow. I'm director of Hong Kong Energy Study Center, Hong Kong Baptist University. From the papers provided by government, if you look at the issue from safety, affordability, and environmental impacts, option 1 is not viable. It's much worse than option 2. Let's talk about safety first. If we purchase from CSG, 30% of the power would come from China, from undedicated lines, and the stability would certainly be lower, would be lower than the two power companies. And when we look around the world, one-stop energy solutions have proved to be most reliable. Environmental impacts, we have no way to know where those 30% of power come from. By the year 2020, 47 or 8% of the power from CSG will still be powered by coal. If we have 10% of our power generated by coal, the carbon emissions will still be lower than CSG. For the same coal plants, the efficiencies of our coal plants are still higher than those of the CSG. And in terms of costs, the Secretary said the costs of buying won't be higher than that generated locally, and I was really surprised. If you purchase power from others, a key issue is how will you negotiate the prices. Unless the Hong Kong government will be directly involved, you shouldn't delegate the issue to private companies. Otherwise, I think the prices won't be very satisfactory. Both options are not satisfactory, and as such, we should look at other options. Using more natural gas is only one of the solutions. However, we should keep other options open. For instance, introducing more nuclear power. Should we look at the LNG terminal again in by CLP? The government has mentioned opening up the market. I recommend the government should learn from other countries to see whether opening up the market would be beneficial to Hong Kong. Mr. Young, from the Liberal Party. Both options proposed by the government would mean increased costs, and it might even be doubled. And we understand that this is the decision to optimize the fuel mix, but has it considered the affordability of the public? And is the government offering enough choices? Both options are similar in terms of affordability, and they're both doubled the current levels. And there are a lot of uncertainties in terms of electricity tariff, etc. And these would be easily influenced by external factors. Under the lack of information at the moment, we cannot make a judgment on the both options. If you force the public to choose from the two options, it's unreasonable. According to an energy reliability report from China, in the first half of 2012, the average energy failure rate of CSG is 1.5 hours. If the government cannot make guarantees on the reliability of power supplies, we cannot make compromises. The current cost of the electricity is cheaper than that's provided by CSG. Facing future increases in electricity tariffs, we should be pragmatic. And we should consider nuclear power, even if we don't import nuclear power. Our neighboring countries are using it nonetheless, so we have to share the risk nonetheless. The government has set a target for carbon emission reduction, and the goal is to reduce the emission by 40 to 50%. Optimizing the fuel mix is only one of the steps of achieving the targets, and it should be voluntary in nature, and it's unfair to ask the public to share the burden. So we should tackle the issue carefully in order to avoid tariff spikes. Kwok Wing Kin from Labour Party. It's hard to compare options 1 and 2. Option 1 is importing from CSG, but we have no way of knowing what their fuel mix is. And these haven't been talked about in the papers, and they are misleading the public. The government should tell us the fuel mix of coal and natural gas, etc. By 2020, the ratio of nuclear power of CSG will increase to almost 10% by 2020. We are opposed to the import of nuclear power and on the responsibility of pollutants. As we have mentioned, coal remains a big part of the fuel mix of CSG. And since the fuel burning units of CSG are less efficient, it will be more polluting. And on the mix of renewable energy in the portfolio, it hasn't been mentioned. Hong Kong is doing a very bad job, and less than 2% of our energy are from renewable sources. And companies like China, Japan, and OECD countries are doing much better. By 2020, 37% of CSG's power will be from hydropower. If we are connecting our grid with the CSG, why don't we stipulate a goal for renewable energy in order to improve emissions? However, when the Secretary responds to media inquiries, he said it's expensive to build a dedicated line. And has the government looked at other countries, they are practicing purchase of electricity, even though it's difficult to know where the power is coming from. The percentage of renewable energy in the mix can be increased, and the government should draw up a policy and timeline for renewable energy sources. The goal of the consultation is to reduce emissions, and has the government adopting other measures like adopting a progressive tariff approach to merchants and businesses. Finally, Ms. Frances Young from Friends of the Earth, Hong Kong. On the consultation of future fuel mix in Hong Kong, we think the government is providing way little information, and it's very difficult to carry out discussions among the community. Both options seem to have their benefits, but at the same time, they create a lot of negative impacts. First, purchasing from Hong Kong, according to the papers, we can introduce different types of renewable energy through this option. However, as some of us have mentioned, we are not purchasing from the grid. We are just connecting both grids. And coal and nuclear power is included in their energy mix. And by purchasing power, we are just transferring the polluting impacts to China. How will the government tackle this issue? And on reliability, the papers very vaguely said we can tackle the issue with business arrangements or agreements or backup electricity. But these are very generic. How do we actually carry it out specifically? And if our power is not enough to tackle contingency cases, these scenarios haven't been covered by the government. And second is to increase the ratio of natural gas. Do we have a stable supply? All around the world, countries are competing for cleaner sources. Are we certain to be able to secure a supply of natural gas? The papers only mentioned the cost of both options.
The government says that the cost for both options is the same, but we don't know how the government did its calculation, and we don't know how the cost will be passed to the public in terms of tariffs. For example, new infrastructure is to be built, but who is to foot the bill? In Hong Kong, if we are to make more use of natural gas, what about the new generating units using natural gas? What about the cost? Who is going to bear the cost? So we'll be impacted upon by the new schemes. But at the moment, we don't know the new schemes of control. So how are we going to make a choice? Given such a phenomenon, such a scenario, we cannot really choose from the two options. Thank you. I think the deputations have been very cooperative in their speaking time, so we now have ample time for discussion with the administration. For members, our discussion and questions will be deferred to the 26th of May. For the administration, I'd like to give them about 27 to 28 minutes to respond to the deputations. What are you prepared to say to them? Anything you can disclose at this juncture? Mr. Wong? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, deputations, for according us this opportunity to discuss this very important issue. Concerning fuel mix is a very complicated issue with technical aspects, different options of different pros and cons. Today we've listened to different views with different analyses and standpoints from the public. But we can be certain of certain points. First of all, the government is serious in energy consumption. At the beginning of the document, we gave you some objective data. From 2008 to recent years, in Hong Kong, power consumption has been on the decline in terms of growth rate, 1% per year, not 2% as mentioned by the deputations. Many sectors of the community have worked hard to save energy, that is, to enhance the environment and also to save money. In the coming summer, we'll have a major campaign on saving electricity. Together with the public, we'll work hard to reduce the demand for electricity. So we are very eager to do something in this regard. Secondly, concerning renewable energy, some friends mentioned other methods adopted by overseas jurisdictions. In overseas jurisdictions, the construction waste can serve as RE, and wind power and solar power are also more commonly used. For construction waste being used as RE, I've been engaged in this regard for 2 decades. Hong Kong is subject to a number of constraints. We admit that we are subject to constraints. Still, we'll work hard to see how we can expand the use of RE. Hong Kong is a dense city, so the use of RE is very much limited. Frankly speaking, in the foreseeable future, we can't attain a double-digit figure. But then we're not excluding any improvement on the use of RE. We're just saying that the use of RE will be very much limited. For long-term planning for power generation, we have to look at more macro figures. The two are not in conflict, and it's not true that the government slights the contribution of RE to power generation. Thirdly, the document clearly states the importance we attach to environmental improvement. We emphasize air quality, and we would like to reduce carbon emission through various methods. We'd like to control the emission from power plants. In 2020, we'd like to attain the latest air quality objectives. This is for the first time the government gives such a clear undertaking. Secondly, to follow up on the last consultation document, where we asked you for the carbon emission reduction target, say 5 to 6% when compared with 2005-06, the document this time has established this as our objective. But environmental protection is not free lunch. We have to pay a price for it. So for the different options we discussed today, there is an indication that be it option 1 or option 2, the generation costs when compared with today will see a rise. For the coal-fired generating units, they will retire gradually in the next few years. Are they to be replaced by new units or by cross-boundary grids? We don't yet know. But even if we don't set any objectives, old generation units will have to be replaced by new ones, and the cost will have to be borne by all parties. Fourthly, as the deputation said, there are pros and cons, be it option 1 or option 2. I hope that on the basis of the 4 major objectives, safety, stability, reasonable price, and environment, these are the 3-4 areas, major areas that we would like to emphasize. We, of course, support environmental protection, but at the same time, we need to consider cost impact and other aspects. In the document, we set out various energy sources which may impact on society. Take, for example, diversity. It seems that we're suggesting that if we emphasize too much on a particular view, in the long run, there will be a risk. Therefore, option 1 carries 4 elements: to reduce cost to a minimum, about 10%, and then for Daya Bay 20%, and then 30% cross-boundary electricity, and then natural gas 40%. This is diversity. For option 2, 60% natural gas, 20% from Daya Bay, and 20% coal-fired. Well, if the price of natural gas is to fluctuate, will be affected. So diversification is lower. As for infrastructure, in 10 years' time, not just Hong Kong's generation power has to be considered, but in the long run, if society and economy have any changes in demand, we'll have to cope with changes in the long run, and we'll have to study the pros and cons. Thirdly, we have to understand that different options will affect society in various ways. Some friends said something about employment, so we have to consider that. Fourthly, in Hong Kong, after 2018, the two power companies may change their schemes of control under the agreement with the government. So in our discussion, we have the 4 original objectives as well as those aspects that I just mentioned. As for reliability, some friends said that option 1 sees a bigger question mark on reliability. We agree to that in the document because in Hong Kong, that's something new. In the document, we mention regional cooperation. In advanced jurisdictions in the world, in Europe, in North America, and other jurisdictions, that is nothing new. For grid-to-grid generation, we should also keep an open mind. I think we need to look more at Macau, our neighbor. Macau has a very different power consumption level than Hong Kong. But if you look at their experience in the past 10 years, that is to have cross-boundary collaboration with the CSG, the reliability of their power supply is now the same as that of Hong Kong, that is 99.999%. Very often we're affected by past experience. You mentioned Guangdong and CSG. Oh yes, in the past they did lack electricity. But that's in the past already. We have to look at the next 10 years. So is the future tense. In the southern part of China, the power supply is improving in terms of stability, quantity, capacity, and fuel mix. Therefore, in the past, there were more occurrences of power failure, but we cannot compare that with the future directly. As for Macau, it is different from Hong Kong, but we can think about it. Macau is now in a very stable condition in terms of power supply, and the price structure is also very stable. Well, even with stability, the deputations queried our future arrangements with CSG. Well, it's premature to say anything in detail. We're still forging consensus in society. In the past 10 years, between Macau and the CSG, their exchanges indicate a level of stability and price level that are worthy of our reference. And apparently, a balance was struck. I'll see whether my colleagues would like to supplement. For the time being, some people say that if we choose option 1, can we choose more environmentally friendly fuel, like land power purchase, or rather green power or clean power purchase? Well, we have to look at the whole region. On the mainland, if they haven't reached that level yet, then we may not be able to immediately leap to that level. For the whole of southern China, the energy policy is to use cleaner energy, so to have cleaner air. Between Hong Kong and Guangdong, we have a 10-year agreement. That is, both Hong Kong and Guangdong have to work hard to improve the air quality of Guangdong. By 2020, we would like to enhance air quality, reduce emission, and reduce the emission of pollutants. So we have a consensus on regional collaboration. For air pollution, through various parties, we're working hard to improve the situation. As for energy, about half of the energy is fossil energy, 30% hydropower, and a little bit of wind-generated power. Well, the ratio is clear. Hydropower is on the rise. Why should we consider regional collaboration? Because we need to consider stability. Different cities, different countries, different jurisdictions have different energy background. In Hong Kong, if we are to use more natural gas and RE, you have to consider that in Hong Kong we don't have much natural water and wind. So to use hydropower, regional collaboration is desirable, perhaps. Anyway, we'll listen to public views. You can speak on option 1 and option 2. We can discuss. Why do we speak more on option 1? Because for Hong Kong is relatively new. For option 2, reliability is higher, relatively. In the past, when we discussed with society, tariff increases and so forth, we said we would like to have more outlets. So the government has put forth 2 options for your reference. Mr. Lau, 5 minutes, please. I'd like to speak on reliability and pollution transfer, because it seems that we're very concerned about these 2 aspects. Just now, the Secretary explained about reliability. For neighboring Macau, the stability and reliability are more or less the same as Hong Kong. That is 99.999%. Many friends mentioned the CSG, power failure, or possibly lower reliability. Well, let me clarify. The CSG is now supplying electricity to 5 provinces. Apart from cities, rural areas also receive electricity from CSG. If you look at the overall power failure or breakdown data, it may not be appropriate. We should compare ourselves with the bigger cities. So Macau is more similar to Hong Kong.
On the reliability issue, it depends whether the CSG can provide us with ample power. According to the figures, in about 10 years, the demand of Hong Kong is around 2% lower than the supply of CSG. And the CSG's power supply has grown by about 9% per year. And as such, they would have ample electricity for Hong Kong. And our demand, the Hong Kong's demand is relatively small compared with the capacity of CSG. And as such, we are confident about our future. If we encounter any problems with the purchase of power, we do have a backup supply of power. And the backup supply, the backup capacity can satisfy the demand of Hong Kong, and the reliability levels are similar as present. And on the transfer of pollution, some people mentioned that if CSG is to provide us with more power, they have to burn more coal. We don't think this is necessarily the case. According to China's policy, they are hoping for more for cleaner energy in the future, and they will be using less coal. In 10 years' time, if Hong Kong has to purchase power from the mainland, there is the chance of them using more coal in order to power Hong Kong is very slim. And we are just using, and just 2% of our energy from the mainland are from coal, so the actual impacts are very limited. So that's all I have to say, Chairman. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the deputations and all your comments, and I'd like to thank the Secretary for coming. The next meeting will be held on the 26th of May. Members, please be on time. In the first session, in the first hour, the government would like to record the papers on the Kai Tak terminal. And the members will ask questions and the government will respond. This is a special meeting today for the deputations and the public, so I'd like to thank the Secretary again. Sorry, this is not the time for a debate, so that's all for today.